Okay. So I am joined today by Murray Macara, a well-known face around particularly the Glasgow courts. Hello Murray, how are you?
Good afternoon, Edith. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year.
We're hoping that 21's a better year than we've come out of, but time will tell.
Could it be any worse?
Well, this is true, I know. So Murray, we're really grateful to you for agreeing to take our quiz, and I'm sure you're going to be a great guest to be having and to answer these questions. So without further ado, we'll just launch into them. So the first question, Murray, is if you weren't a lawyer, what would you be?
All right. First of all, before we answer that question, you may have heard some background noise a moment or two ago. There's a dog in the room who's been scratching a spare piece of carpet that he likes to scratch, so we may be interrupted.
Oh, that's
but
fine.
Anyway, Edith, to answer your question, I suspect I would have been a pilot, or I'd have had an ambition to be a pilot.
Wow.
Because when I went to university, it was my ambition to join the Air Squadron, which is part of the RAF. Mm-hmm. And I managed to get an acceptance and spent quite a lot of time when I was at university learning to fly and actually flying. And I must admit, I was quite seduced by the lifestyle. I really quite enjoyed it. Good lifestyle for a young man, good lifestyle for a bachelor, maybe not such a good lifestyle when you get older and when you have commitments. But I did enjoy it. I suspect at the end of the day, I really wasn't a good enough pilot to make the grade, because everyone, I think, has an ambition when they think about joining the RAF that they're going to be a pilot, and in particular, a fighter pilot. And I suspect I certainly wasn't good enough to do that. I think I'd have been flying much more humble aircraft if I had joined the Air Force.
That's amazing, Murray. And so what was it, a flying club at university that you became a member of?
Yeah, no, I went to the University of Glasgow, and the organisation is called the University of Glasgow and Strathclyde Air Squadron, and they're based in Park Circus. They were then, and I think they still are.
Right.
And students from both Glasgow and Strathclyde apply every year, and a certain number are taken on, and the instructors are all serving RAF officers. And when I started, we were based at Scone Airfield in Perth. Mm-hmm. But while I was at university, the current Glasgow airport opened at Abbotssinch, and the Air Squadron transferred to Glasgow Airport. So it was a very interesting 3 years. I mean, one guy that I was quite friendly with in the law faculty who started law at the same time as I did, in fact, became a pilot. He didn't become a pilot in the Air Force, but he joined what was then BEA and became BA, and he never looked back.
I bet he didn't. And so what kind of aircraft were you flying then in your university days?
Well, an aircraft called a Chipmunk, which is a glorified tiger moth, which is quite a famous aircraft between the wars. The Chipmunk wasn't a biplane, it was a monoplane, but it was pretty basic. To give you an idea, it would take off at about 38, 40 knots, which is maybe about 45 miles an hour, and you were landing at much the same speed. And I think in a gentle dive, you managed to get about 135 miles an hour out of it. So it was a pretty basic aircraft, but it was good fun.
Absolutely.
There's a bit of a sequel.
It beats the university chess club or something like that. It sounds far more exciting.
Yeah. The only time in my life I've ever been asked for my autograph is when I was coming out my aircraft at Glasgow Airport when I was approaching the tarmac, because the public could go onto the tarmac at certain points at the airport in those days. There wasn't the same level of security. Some boy came up and asked for my autograph as if that was worth having. The glamour of flying a glorified Second World War aircraft.
Well, that's a really interesting story.
Not so very long ago, my wife and daughter bought me a simulated flying lesson on a Boeing 737, and I clearly wasn't going to make it as a pilot, because the target was to fly from Glasgow to Belfast in the simulator, it was going to last about 45 minutes. I managed to get the aircraft off the ground at Glasgow Airport, but we took off from the grass. I was unable to keep a straight line on the runway.
Oh,
but we'd set a course for Belfast that took us over Prestwick Airport and Turnberry, and I managed to go over Prestwick Airport and over Turnberry. But at some point after that, I completely lost it, and we ended up spending the next half hour going round in circles over the Firth of Clyde, and I never got to Belfast.
Oh dear.
So I may not have made it as a pilot.
Well, that maybe just confirms you took the right path into the law, Murray.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right. Question number 2. Did you have a nickname at school? And if so, what was it and why were you given it?
Well, I'm going to answer that question with a little bit of a preface. First of all, my father gave me a nickname before I went to school. He called me McSquackle. I have no idea why that was. Do not know who McSquackle was or what it meant. But when I went to school, some really imaginative person, knowing that my name was Murray Macara, decided to give me an alliterative nickname, and that was Mucky. So it was either Mucky Murray or Mucky Macara, and I have to say I wasn't necessarily the cleanest child. My handwriting was awful, but I really enjoyed digging around in dirt. I did that at home in the garden, made roads and walls and embankments. And I went to a boarding school in the East, and when we were about 11 or 12, we were given little plots, maybe about 12 feet by 12 feet. And the object of the exercise was to cultivate things like wallflowers and pansies and violas, to teach you, to instill some interest in gardening and, you could actually grow something. Well, there weren't enough plots to go round, and I had to share a plot with somebody else who really wasn't at all interested in anything. But I was really enthused by having the opportunity every evening to spend time in this plot, and I dug out canals and I put in tiles to prevent the water leaking out, and I had sluice gates. Every night I was digging these canals and creating some sort of engineering masterpiece in my 12 feet by 12 feet plot. So no wonder I was called Mucky. There's a bit of a sequel to this, which doesn't reflect too well on me, I have to say. That the object of the exercise was that the best plot, or the custodians of the best plot at the end of the term, would get an award, would get some sort of prize. And of course, other boys at this school were doing their best to cultivate the plots as best they can, and there was some signs of progress, but there was absolutely no sign of progress in our plot, which was just brown and grey. The boy that I shared this plot with, who's going to be anonymous for the purpose of this story, came from a pretty well-to-do background. As far as I can recall, his father owned half of East Lothian, and they had a gardener. And the gardener was I think you can predict what's happening next. On the eve of the prize giving, the day of decision, the gardener was dispatched early in the morning to transform this plot and give it a makeover. And when we get up the next morning, it looked like something out of the Chelsea Flower Show. And needless to say, we won. We won. We got a fairly modest prize of a very simple book on gardening, but nobody else protested, and nobody had noticed that until 5 hours before this, it was a desert. And I just don't understand it. But and to be fair, I probably spent more time in my plot than anybody else did in theirs. That's the only way I can justify our undeserved triumph.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that's a great story. And are you still a keen gardener, Murray?
Yes, I am. No, I do spend quite a lot of time in the garden. Yes, no. So the competition had some merit.
Good stuff. Okay, question 3 is, what was your first job?
Well, I really haven't ever had a job other than law. I didn't have any summer jobs because, as I've said already, I was spending time with the Air Squadron. But one vacation when I was at university, I did spend some time with McClure Naismith Brodie and Company, as it then was, and I was sent by the executory, the trust and executory partner, to undertake a house clearance in Largs, and it's really a rather sad story. This elderly lady had died, who was a client of McClure's, who had no relatives, and McClure's were effectively being asked to empty out her house and wind up the estate. And obviously I don't know what the terms of her will were, but this partner dispatched me to Largs with keys to look through her house, deal with clothes and all her household goods. But by the time I'd spent a few days there, I felt as if I knew this lady who had died before I ever came on the scene. And it really was very sad that, A, I never met her, but B, she had nobody else to do, what was really quite a sentimental chore. And, I really felt for this poor old lady who had died without ever knowing me. And it was almost as if I was encroaching on her life in carrying out this rather sad, but I suppose necessary task. So house clearance, that was my first job.
Oh, well, at least you appreciated her and the things you found out about her. I suppose you could have had some hard-hearted person raking through her stuff. So that's one consolation. So question number 4, Murray, is what do you recall of your first court appearance?
Well, I didn't serve my apprenticeship, and that's what we did in those days with Beltrami and Company, with whom I ultimately spent many, many years. I'm still associated with them. But my first court appearance was on the very first day I joined Beltrami and Company, or Beltrami Dunn and Company as it then was. I turned up at 9 o'clock in the morning at Glasgow Sheriff Court as instructed. I was given a moth-eaten gown. It should have been condemned. It was a health hazard. I'm told to go to Paisley to appear for a client on a speeding charge. So 10 minutes after meeting up in the common room, I was dispatched to Paisley on the train. And of course, when I'm on the train to Paisley, I'm quite worried about what's going to happen when I get to Paisley Sheriff Court, because the fear that I had is that I was going to be identified as an imposter, that some court officer or the clerk of court, even the sheriff, was going to say, well, who are you? How do I know you're a solicitor? Why are you appearing for this man? So I actually phoned up when I got to Paisley to say, what do I do here? And they said, just don't do anything, just appear in court. Nobody will say anything. And neither they did. And that was swiftly followed by my first trial, which I think was the next day. I had to go to Hamilton Sheriff Court to defend somebody in a housebreaking charge before Sheriff Ian Dixon. That's Bobby Dixon's father.
Right.
And the man that I was defending was some old lag who really knew more about the criminal law than I ever did, certainly at that stage of my career. And I can remember the Crown case ended, and I turned round to him and I said, well, are you going to give evidence now? And he turned round to me in no uncertain terms and said, no way whatsoever. And he knew there wasn't enough evidence against him. I didn't, and he was duly acquitted.
Oh my.
No thanks to my contribution. He knew to keep his mouth shut.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm really impressed that you can remember details. Some of the guests are like me, and they say, oh, once I've done a case, it goes out of my mind. I suppose there are certain things that do stick, but I'm really impressed that you can remember the details of your first appearances. That's impressive.
Well, the next 200 after that mean nothing to me. It's just there are milestones and there are landmarks, and they're perhaps few and far between.
Okay, Murray, question number 5 is, who is or was your most inspiring colleague?
I really can't identify any single person. I'm bound to say that you get inspiration from colleagues at the start of your career rather than towards the end of your career, because it's a learning process, and you look at colleagues and say, what can I learn from this person? What is he or she doing well? what can I take from the way they present themselves in court? And I think that the sort of individuals that I can think of from many, many years ago are Maurice Smythe, who's still around, because I ended up doing a lot of sheriff and jury trials with him when he was a very experienced pleader and I was new to the game. And also Bob Gibson, who sadly is no longer with us. Mm-hmm. And Bob Gibson was a remarkable man because he really operated under the radar. He was a jack of all trades, which you could be many, many years ago in the 1970s, but really can't be anymore. Mm. And if you ever asked a fiscal in that era who they most disliked appearing against, they would all say Bob Gibson, because they would know that when he came into court, he had a point.
Okay.
They didn't necessarily know what the point was, but it was never a spurious point. It was always a good point, and more often than not, they never saw what the point was. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they were colleagues who inspired me and from whom I felt I learned quite a lot.
Yeah.
And in terms of people at the bar that I saw quite a lot of in my early days, well, Nicky Fairbairn wasn't yet an MP, and Joe Beltrami instructed him quite a lot, and he was, you know, an impressive advocate, particularly when it came to cross-examining expert witnesses, particularly medical witnesses. He was very, very impressive, and of course was a great orator. And also Bobby Younger, who we instructed quite frequently as junior counsel, who went on to become a sheriff in Glasgow and Stirling, and who had an extremely calm manner. And if he hadn't become a sheriff, we would have done exceptionally well at the bar if he'd taken silk. But he didn't strike me as being a particularly ambitious man. He was balanced. He had the ear of the court. The court trusted him, and he was somebody I respected immensely.
Mm-hmm. Great. So a number of people have influenced you along the way, certainly, Murray. Question number 6 is, how do you define success?
Well, I suspect I'm not really talking about individual cases here, individual success, but rather professional success when I answer your question, Edith. And so it's not really a question of looking at individual triumphs, but really the overall attainment of success, I suspect, comes from earning the respect of your colleagues, a feeling that you have the ear of the court, that judges trust you, juries can be persuaded by you. That I think it's just an overall impression that is created by that combination of qualities: respect, trust, having, as I say, having the ear of the court. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Question number 7: favorite holiday destination?
Well, like so many answers I've given, I can't separate 3 places that my wife Elaine and I have been to. I really can't. 2 of them are pretty obvious. New York. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to be excited about going to New York. You know, if you get off the plane at Newark and take the New Jersey Turnpike, and then you turn east towards Manhattan, you come down over a rise at Hoboken to go into the Lincoln Tunnel, and there straight ahead of you is the Empire State Building. Everyone's got to be inspired by that. It's such a vibrant, lovely, lively city that New York's there. Another obvious selection is New Zealand, which again, my wife and I were lucky enough to go to about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Beautiful country, friendly people. It's always top of everybody's list. And the third place, I think, is maybe a little bit unexpected, out of left field perhaps, and that's Japan.
All right, okay.
It did not disappoint from the moment I got off the plane until the moment we get back on the plane. Friendly people, even if you can't really communicate with them, and it's an impossible language, but it's a country where everything works. Everybody's polite, everybody's respectful, and an absolutely wonderful country. I can't recommend it enough to anybody who happens to be listening and perhaps might be influenced by my random thoughts.
Absolutely. If we can get flying again or going on holidays again.
Exactly. Exactly. These dreams are fast fading into the past.
I know. Oh, well, they're three very interesting places. I'm sure you'll have inspired somebody with those answers.
Yeah.
Question number 8, your most memorable case, Murray?
Well, again, I'm going to have to give you 2, Edith, I'm afraid. At quite an early stage in my career, I was determined to appear in every court in Scotland.
Okay.
I'd been a solicitor maybe for about 2 years when I saw there was a fatal accident inquiry in Lochmaddy. And I was determined to get to Lochmaddy, and I never knew if I had the chance of going back. So I volunteered to conduct this FAI. And in those days, FAI, the framework, the legislative framework that governed FAIs was entirely different. First of all, it wasn't the sheriff who issued the determination, it was a jury. And it wasn't a jury of 15, it was a jury of 7. So there were a number of unusual features to this case, not least because it was in Lochmaddy, but the deceased was a native of Lochboysdale in South Uist, who was found in the water off Lochboysdale Pier one morning, and his family really thought his death was suspicious. He had a significant mark in his forehead that had probably knocked him out, and he had then drowned in the water at Lochboysdale. And we were instructed by the family, and it was a tragic case. There was no doubt about it in my mind that it was a tragic accident, because this individual had fallen in with some fishermen from the northeast of Scotland. They'd spent the evening in the pub, and I suspect that, in fact, I recall that they had invited him onto the fishing boat after the pub closed. And of course, he'd spent some time there. And as he had spent time in the boat, the tide had come in, and the lines between the boat and the pier had tightened. He hadn't realised that there was now some movement and some distance between the boat and the pier. And in his drunken state, he'd fallen into the water, probably fallen against the pier and knocked himself out, and he drowned. The interesting thing about this case is that, first of all, the jury, to a man, so the unimpaneled jurors went downstairs to collect their expenses, and all the men and women who were unimpaneled then came back upstairs to watch the FAI, because it was something of a cause célèbre in North Uist at the time. And the sheriff had to be in Portree the next morning, so we had to sit on and finish the case that night. So not only did we stop for lunch, we stopped for dinner, and the case finished at 11:30 at night.
Really?
And the other case, if you can indulge me, was a court-martial, a general court-martial I did in Berlin very shortly after the Berlin Wall came down. So again, it wasn't so much the case, it was just the overall context. The court-martial took place in the Olympic complex in Berlin from the 1936 Olympics. It was very close to the Olympic Stadium. The weather was absolutely stunning, it was gorgeous when I was there. So I was able to go for a swim in the water polo pool every lunchtime. And the court-martial centre was in a very impressive wooden panelled room where the fencing competition had taken place in 1936. And it was a general court-martial because it was effectively an attempted murder. So at that stage, when I was undertaking this court-martial, I didn't have rights of audience in the High Court because no solicitors did have rights of audience in the High Court. And it was the most serious case that I ever had personally defended for a very impressive individual who was a Royal Marine and who was pleading self-defence to what was effectively an attempted murder charge. And the court managed to acquit him. And it was fascinating being in Berlin that beautiful August, warm August, just months after maybe about 10 months or so, 12 months or so after the wall came down, and seeing the contrast between East Berlin and West Berlin, fascinating.
Amazing.
So that was also an extremely memorable case.
It certainly sounds it. That's incredible. I'm just imagining you swimming up and down the Olympic pool, imagining you were taking part.
Well, I don't know if you know this, as I said, it was water polo. There's no shallow end or deep end in a water polo pool. It's all a uniform depth.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, good for you. That's a really interesting. That's a really interesting answer. Thank you, Murray. Question number 9. Who has had the biggest influence on your career in the law?
Well, again, I'm not giving you a straight answer, Edith. I remember that when Lady Ray, when you interviewed Lady Ray, I think it was Lady Ray referred to Marshall Hall as somebody who had inspired her. Well, there is one of these great old English barristers, King's Counsel, that has inspired me, and that's Norman Burkett. So I brought this book along, Norman Burkett, The Life of Lord Burkett of Ulverston by F. Montgomery Hyde. This book cost me the princely sum of £1, but he was at his zenith, if you like, between the 2 world wars. He eventually became a judge, and indeed may well have gone into the House of Lords, but he defended something like 60 capital murder cases over that 20-year period. Wow. And at the end of his life was asked how many had gone to the gallows, and the answer was, would you care to hazard a guess?
I don't know. That'll be what? Oh, really? 3?
3 out of 60 or so.
Amazing.
And the characteristic that came through from his career more than anything else was his integrity.
Right.
And he was trusted, and he was liked, and he was respected. So that's number 1. Second, for anyone in my generation who went to the University of Glasgow is probably surprised to hear this, is Professor David Walker, as in Walker on Delict and many other books that he wrote, Regius Professor of Scots Law at the University of Glasgow, who frankly was a very inspiring and inspired lecturer. He really made some subjects come alive. I can, to this day, remember his lectures in Delict. He was a hard taskmaster. He failed a lot of people. He was very demanding. But if you stayed with him, if you attended his lectures and paid attention to what he said, all was well. And he was somebody that inspired me not just to become a solicitor, but to be involved at least in court work rather than any other aspect of law. And the third person, given that I was associated with him for more than 30 years, I have to mention him, is Joe Beltrami. He was always enthusiastic about the job that he did. He desperately wanted to be regarded as somebody who was eminently respectable. He didn't mix with his clients, for example. He had an extraordinary ability to recognize a good case from a bad case. He instinctively knew a good case when he saw it. And there was a standing joke for many years that if he turned up at the High Court towards the end of a trial when the jury were coming in to return their verdict, it was always an acquittal. He had an instinctive nose for spotting a good case from a bad one. Yeah. And he wasn't necessarily the greatest lawyer, and I don't think he would necessarily ever pretend to have been the greatest lawyer, but he was very good at spotting key facts and issues in cases. And obviously I spent a lot of time with him. Didn't see him in court very often, because if I was in one court, he was in another court. Yeah. But he was somebody I spent a lot of time with.
Oh, fantastic. 3 really people that have influenced you, Murray. So that's
indeed.
That's indeed an accolade of itself. All right. Question number 10 is your funniest or most memorable court moment.
Do you know, Edith, that's a really difficult question to answer. I mean, there have been many, many funny moments in court, and somebody should always write these things down when they happen, because they go out your mind. One I can think of is a sheriff and jury trial in Perth before Sheriff Ford in the old main court in Perth, court number 1. And it was again, I've mentioned Bob Gibson and Maurice Smythe, and I seem to recall they were the other agents involved. So there were 3 of us, but there were 6 accused, because you did that in those days, with 2 each. Unfortunately, I had accused numbers 5 and 6, and they were all charged. They were all from Glasgow, and they were charged with an assault and robbery at, I think, a post office in Fortingall in Perthshire, so a small rural post office. So I don't know what was in it for 6 robbers from Glasgow in a village post office in Forteviot, but The evidence against them seemed to come from, mainly, as I recall it, from some Socius, whose name was, as I recall it, Mr. Falsey. And true to his name, Mr. Falsey was something of a perjurer. And I didn't realise this, but the witness box in Perth Sheriff Court at that time, at least, was quite high up off the well of the court, 2 or 3 steps up. So you got a good view of the witness, and it was largely an open witness box. There was a railing round it, but you could pretty well see the witness. You could see the top half of their body, but you could also see their legs. And either Bob Gibson or Maurice Smythe pointed out that any time Mr. Falsey told a lie, he was dancing about in the jury box. He was doing a tap dance. And by the time Mr. Falsey finished giving evidence, he was a proper Fred Astaire. He was jumping about. And I think we had to have an adjournment while we sorted ourselves out, because I couldn't take my eyes off him once I realised that he was doing an impression of Gene Kelly.
Oh my goodness. And what happened to your 6 accused? Do you remember?
Absolutely. We were all allocated roles at the start of the trial. I don't know if Bob Gibson was to do the legal points and any objections, and Maurice Smythe was to cross-examine, but I was simply to read the law and keep my mouth shut. And brick by brick, the Crown case was dismantled, and it was they walked away, and the Crown dropped the case after 2 or 3 days.
Fantastic. That sounds like a good method to employ. Okay, question 11, Murray, is we all make mistakes. What have you learned from a professional error?
Well, Professor Walker wrote a book on delict, and I think we've all got professional colleagues who've written a book on adjournments. My textbook is Macara on mistakes, because I could write a book about them. So this is early. I'd been in practice for about a month, and was leaving the office for lunch, knowing that at 1:45 I had to go to Glasgow Sheriff Court to the legal aid court, because in those days, in summary cases, it was the sheriff who decided whether an accused person was granted legal aid, and they had to turn up for this court that started at 1:45. And if you got there quickly enough, you were taken first, but there might, if you were unlucky, be 25 or 30 people queuing to get into the legal aid court to have their applications considered. So somebody else in the office, who will remain nameless, knew I was going to the legal aid court at 1:45 and said, well, do a favour for me at 2 o'clock and appear for this client who is facing a minute of civil imprisonment. And what that involved was a defender who had been the subject of divorce proceedings or some form of matrimonial process where an award of aliment had been made against him and he hadn't been paying it. And the pursuer, his wife or ex-wife, was able to apply to the sheriff to have him locked up because he wasn't paying aliment. So I have probably explained more about this process to you in the last minute than my colleague did in the 30 seconds that he asked me to do this favour. And he said that it's all right, there won't be a proof. We're tendering £5 a week and the other side will accept that. So you can imagine that everything went wrong. First of all, the legal aid court didn't start promptly, and although I was taken first, I didn't get out of that court in time to allow me to get to Court 9 in the Sheriff Court for 2 o'clock. The Sheriff in Court 9 was one Charles Hampton Johnston QC, who went on to become Sheriff Principal in South Strathclyde, Dumfries and Galloway, and he was a stickler for punctuality. If I arrived in the court at 15 seconds past 2, he was already settling into his seat on the bench. There was a clerk, there was a court officer. My opponent, the pursuer's solicitor, Jim Murphy of Ross Harper and Murphy, was in his seat. Jim Murphy is Sean Murphy's, late Jim Murphy, Sean Murphy's father, and he later became a sheriff himself in Dumbarton for many, many years. And there were two people in the back of the court, a man and a woman. And of course, it didn't take Sherlock Holmes to work out who my client was. So I gave him the thumbs up. I didn't get a chance to speak to him. Case called, and I think I may have made some apology for lateness, which was clearly didn't go down well. And I then explained I was appearing for the defender and that I was tendering £5 a week. And the sheriff said to me in a stern manner that the time for tendering had long since passed and we're here for a proof. Get on with it. Oh, no. So I sat down again because I knew my civil procedure and I knew that the pursuer leads. However, not in minutes of civil imprisonment. In a minute of civil imprisonment, the defender leads. So I was then forced to call this man I'd never spoken to. So the examination went along the lines of, what's your name? How old are you? Where do you live? What's your occupation? I got through about 5 questions before the first objection was taken. And every objection that was taken, and there were a lot of them, was sustained by the sheriff. And after about 20 minutes, I was put out of my misery, and Jim Murphy accepted a tender of £5 a week.
Oh, no.
And that was swiftly followed by the court officer, whose name I remember to this day, Jerry O'Hara, inviting me into the sheriff's chambers. And to be fair to Sheriff Johnston, he was quite civil about things, but we had a frank discussion about what had happened that afternoon, if I could put it that way. So lessons to learn. Beware committing yourself to undertaking favours for colleagues. Be familiar with the case, the law, the procedure, the facts. Take proper instructions from the client. Speak to the clerk and your opponent to get the lie of the land. And finally, don't be late. Lessons learned in 25 minutes on that summer's day many, many years ago, but never forgotten that day.
Oh my, yeah, that certainly seems to encapsulate a lot of good advice, Murray. Poor you, having to encounter that. Oh, but you clearly coped very well with it. I'm impressed. Okay, question number 12. What do you do to stay well, Murray?
Well or fit? Fit. Well, if I can be called fit. I play golf increasingly badly. I do quite a lot of walking because we've got a dog. And 2.5 years ago, I started taking up yoga.
Right.
And I love yoga. Got the zeal of the convert. I can't speak highly enough of it. So there you are, yoga.
Oh, well, you're keeping yourself very fit by the sounds of things.
Well, hardly, but it's all relative. But I really enjoy yoga and I feel the benefit. From attending these classes. Mm-hmm. And we can do it in Zoom. Well, one of my yoga teachers is in Mallorca, and that's the benefit of Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, question 13 is, what advice would you give on dealing with challenging clients?
So note to use the word challenging rather than difficult. Challenging is such a better word. Well, I think we all have to be psychologists to some extent when we deal with clients. You know, I think we have to try to find out what their expectations are and whether we can manage these expectations. I think we have to remember that a challenging client quite often wants to be in control of the situation, to be in control of the process. And all you need to listen to them and take instructions and find out what their issues are. Ultimately, you've got to remember that you're in control of the process. I don't mean you have to do this in an aggressive or assertive way, but you have to keep bringing them back to the position in which you're in charge of the process rather than them. As I say, I think you have to be a bit of a psychologist in dealing with clients. You have to be able to read them and try to understand them. And as I say, try to find out what they expect and try to either meet these expectations, or if that can't be done, at least ensure that you let them understand that their expectations are unrealistic.
Good answer. I like that. Very measured and comprehensive. Thank you. Question number 14 is, would you recommend law as a career?
Qualified, yes. Qualified, yes. I think if any, you can't drift into the law. I know quite a lot of people, particularly when I was at university, who had drifted into the law because it seemed to be the thing to do. And I think it doesn't matter what field of law you want to specialize in, you need to commit to it. And I think I've listened to one or two of the other interviews you've conducted, Edith, and one of the messages that comes across loud and clear is how much we are a collegiate profession. We rely on colleagues, we socialise with colleagues, we talk to colleagues. It's a chummy profession, or it can be a chummy profession. And that's something that gives us, I think, great comfort and enthuses us with the profession on a daily or weekly basis. So yes, a qualified thumbs up for law as a career.
Yeah.
There are lots of challenges, there are lots of problems, but the same could be said for many, many professions. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, question 15. What aspects of your job bring you the most satisfaction?
Sorry, Edith. I suppose just when you get up in the morning, you know what the challenges are that lie ahead on that particular day. If you can rise to those challenges, meet those challenges, whether it's trying to juggle and do 2 cases at once, or whether it's make a jury speech that you've been thinking about for a few days, perhaps even a few weeks, and you feel you've risen to that challenge, then I think that gives you satisfaction.
Okay. Yep, absolutely. Good answer again from you, Murray. Question 16 is, what skill should every lawyer have or learn?
Well, you and I are both, well, you're an advocate with a capital A, and I'm an advocate with a small a. So talking about advocacy, I think we need to look at what skills an advocate requires to possess. And first and foremost, it's an ability to communicate, an aspiration to be persuasive. I think I've already made the point about trying to manage expectations, and that's part of the process. So it's developing that sort of package of skills that you associate with, I suppose, the great advocates of the past. I know I've used this phrase before, that there are, we think about integrity and the qualities that the great advocates of the past have had, and I think we need to study them and look at what they do well and what we can learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, question 17 is your favourite chocolate bar?
I suppose on a weekly basis I eat Kit Kat and Snickers, maybe if I'm having some sort of treat. But ultimately, deep down, what I really crave for is some exotic dark chocolate, some continental dark chocolate, not milk chocolate, but I do like dark chocolate.
And do you manage to get your hands on that, or is it just when you go on holiday? Is it specific foreign chocolate?
Well, just now and again, special occasions perhaps.
Yeah, although they do say the dark chocolate's better for you, so there would be an excuse to indulge more in that.
Well, there's a justification. I'll bear that in mind, Edith.
Okay, question number 18, Murray, is what job would you be terrible at?
Tightrope walking. I think I'd do that once and I'd then fall and seriously injure myself. No, seriously. In law, conveyancing, I think I'd be a dreadful conveyancer. Further afield, I couldn't see myself being a surgeon, particularly something as responsible as a brain surgeon. I'd be so afraid of making a catastrophic mistake. I think I'm the first to acknowledge I've made many mistakes as a solicitor, but my God, as a surgeon, can you afford to make any mistakes?
Well, the stakes are pretty high, aren't they?
Yeah, they certainly are. No, I don't think I can't see myself being a surgeon.
No. And what is it about conveyancing that you say you wouldn't be suited to doing that?
Well, from what I can remember of conveyancing from many, many years ago, it's every aspect of it. From drafting deeds to in those days to note titles. I just couldn't bear the thought of it. So apologies to any conveyancers out there who happen to be watching this. I'm sure I've offended them.
Not at all. Horses for courses, I'm sure. Question number 19 is, and this is a special moment I know in your household today, your favourite animal, and if you've got a pet, it's to make an appearance. And I know that there's a special occasion today, Murray.
There is a special occasion today. Our dog, Rudy, a golden retriever, is 10 today. Aww. But believe it or not, he has disappeared out the door with my wife while we've been talking to one another. He doesn't normally get walked mid-afternoon or late afternoon, but I'm afraid he's gone outside with my wife, so I'm afraid he's not going to be putting in the appearance. I think this must be a special birthday treat for him that he's being allowed to go out for a walk in the middle of the afternoon. Oh. So I'm sorry, Edith. I couldn't get him. He's too heavy. He's 35 kilos, so I'd have to move the camera anyway to get him. But yeah, it is a special day. He's 10 today, Edith.
Oh, well, happy birthday to Rudy. I saw him earlier on before we started to record, and he certainly looked very excited that he's 10 today. So yes. He was doing a lot of barking earlier.
Absolutely.
That's very sweet. And he's a Labrador, is that a golden labby?
Golden retriever. My wife Elaine and I have always had dogs, and we've always had golden retrievers. So he's number 3. He's one of a litter of 13. So wow. I wonder if the other 12 dogs are celebrating their 10th birthday today.
Well, good for him. Happy birthday, Rudy. Pity we didn't see him, but... so we've come to the final question, Murray, which is, what question should we have included in the quiz?
Oh, that's such a good question, Edith. Tell me something along the lines of, can you tell me something that's unusual about yourself that not many people know?
Okay. I think, to be fair, that was a question in our original quiz, but do you want to answer that, Murray? What is something that is unusual that people wouldn't expect of you?
Well, when I was younger and fitter, I could do a mean Cossack dance, which always went down quite well, and ate some reels, for example, when you find yourself in the middle.
I bet. And I was going to dare to ask if you're prepared to do that just now.
No, I don't think my back will. I don't have enough room in the room that I'm sitting in, but I'm not going to rise to the bait, Edith. I don't think my back would stand up to it anymore. And the other thing is I've got, this may sound inordinately I'm guilty of excessive pride here, but I've got a very good sense of direction.
Right.
Problem is, in 2021, everybody's got sat nav, so nobody needs anybody with a sense of direction anymore.
Oh.
Having said that, I've just had a call from a colleague, Alan Gravel, who had to go to Forest this morning, and his sat nav took him from Carbridge to Forest over a road that I've driven a few times in down the years, and needless to say, he had to get towed out of the predicament that he found himself in the snow, because his sat nav didn't take into account the fact that there was snow on the ground and the temperature was -5, so he should have stuck to the main roads. So,
oh no, well I hope he's all right.
He is. No, but I get various messages from him, but eventually he was rescued and he managed to get to Forest.
What a shame. Yeah, there's some tricky roads up that way that you need to know about, especially in the bad weather. What
Absolutely.
a shame. Oh, well, Murray, we've come to the end of the quiz, but you've been a truly brilliant guest. You've given some really interesting answers, and hopefully people have had a bit of a snapshot into Murray Macara the person, as well as Murray Macara the lawyer. You've furnished us with lots of interesting stories from your past, both legal and just about yourself. So thank you so very much for taking part.
Edith, thank you. Flattery will get you everywhere, but yes. Anyway, an interesting experience. I'm not sure I would recommend this. I'm giving a qualified thumbs up. Anyway, thank you, Edith. Very kind of you to ask me to speak to you.
No, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay.